Hey folks, BENTHELOONey here. Hope y'all had a happy Thanksgiving. Well, I was thinking about what to make a video about this week, and then I remembered it's been over 3 years since I made a video about music. Wow, I have a lot of catching up to do. I've gotten into a hell of a lot of music since I made my last video on music, so I should stop this introduction and go ahead and jump right in. For starters, let's start with the familiar territory of my favorite music genre, classic rock. We're going way back for this section. We're going to the start of rock and roll. I remember riding around in my mom's car as a tyke while she listened to the oldie station, and I soaked in all the great music that I would love for years to come. I recently rediscovered the simple yet groundbreaking sound of the rise of rock and roll in the 1950s. I've fallen in love with rock pioneers Little Richard, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Little Richard may not have been the creator of rock and roll, as he claims he is. He was definitely an innovator of it, though. Richard broke a lot of new ground when it came to performing. He was quite shocking as not only a black man getting this much attention, but a gay man. He was definitely a shock to American parents at the time, but he had musical talent to make him last throughout the ages, penning some of rock's biggest staples and some of my personal favorite songs. He has a high energetic voice that pulls you up out of your seat and gets you to dance along with him. I never get tired of listening to Little Richard. Buddy Holly is a tragic case of a talented man who was taken away from us way too soon. He was one of the first musicians who exclusively wrote his own music, starting a trend of musicians being the main creative force of the music they perform. He might have looked like one of the geeks that got beat up in high school at the time, but what he lacked in sex appeal, his music more than made up for. In an era when most artists were too worried to break away from their style, Holly was willing to try new things to make his music sound fresh and new. Sadly, in 1959, Holly died in a plane crash along with fellow musicians Big Bopper and Ritchie Valens. It's a day dubbed by music journalists as the day the music died. Holly left 3 albums and a legacy as one of the most influential musicians who ever lived, and one of my favorite artists. Chuck Berry is dubbed the father of rock and roll, and that's a title he deserves and lives up to. His contribution to rock and roll includes helping to bring rock and roll music into the mainstream, with his single, Maybelline, selling 1 million copies upon release. He also influenced how musicians performed on stage, known for exploiting his signature dancing moves along with performing on guitar. Chuck Berry has written some of my favorite songs of all time, with the aforementioned Maybelline always making me bob my head to it. I can't think of any Berry songs I don't like. I can guarantee that if the US wasn't segregated at the time, Chuck Berry would have been regarded as the king of rock and roll, not Elvis. If my passion was making music instead of cartoons, Jerry Lee Lewis would be one of my top influences. He's considered rock and roll's first wild man, known for his wild onstage antics and his commanding and shrieking voice. What sets Jerry Lee Lewis apart from other musicians at the time is he married his 13-year-old cousin. Nah, that's not it. That did happen though. But Lewis was an early example of a musician who played more than one genre. His albums could have songs that were toe-tapping rock and roll numbers, but he also found success as a pretty good country singer as well. While Jerry Lee Lewis's controversial personal life might overshadow his career, I hope music lovers can see past that and appreciate the artistry of him. His songs have a sense of fun that makes it impossible not to shake yourself to, and know that not all rednecks marry their cousins. Just some of them. The last rock and roll innovator of the time I'll mention is Bo Diddley. It's sad because Bo Diddley doesn't get as much recognition as the artists mentioned above do. Bo was an early example of combining music genres together. He was known for combining the music structure of rock and roll with the chorus-driven vocals of R&B, helping to create the prototype for what would be pop music. He even had a beat named after him, the Bo Diddley beat. How many musicians you know contribute so much to music that they have a beat named after them? Not to mention, more than Buddy Holly, Bo Diddley wrote most of his songs all by himself. Most artists nowadays don't even do that. I love Bo Diddley because he performed 3 of my favorite music genres, rock and roll, R&B, and blues. He's one of those artists who you must listen to before you die. Speaking of the blues, I think this is a good time to talk about that. I like to say that life is too short to listen to one music genre. There is so much more music out there that the radio doesn't have the guts to play. You can't call yourself a music fan unless you do some research and discover genres and musicians that you might love better than the crap they play on the radio. That being said, practicing what I preach, I've gotten into several different music genres since my last music video. One of my favorite genres that I've gotten into is the blues. It has origins in Reconstruction era South, where poor blacks would sing about their misfortunes and feelings of depression. It evolved into one of the most beloved and influential music genres of all time. Blacks contributed a lot to music, haven't they? What makes the blues so appealing is its simple structure and stripped down feel. Listening to an old blues musician sounds like you're sitting right there next to him as he plays his guitar on a rocking chair in his shack in the country. Some of the recordings of early blues songs might sound too far gone to restore, but I think that only adds to their low budget and time capsule charm. They take you back to a time in America where all people had to get through their problems by just picking up a guitar and playing music. Of course, as the years went on, blues evolved to incorporate electric guitars and backup bands to expand their sound and exposure. The influence of blues is astronomical. Blues musicians influence all the biggest names in rock and music in general, and is cited as being the prototype to what would become rock and roll. It's hard to talk about blues musicians separately as they all have pretty similar styles, but I'd be more than happy to list my favorite blues musicians: Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, John Lee Hooker, Elmore James, Sonny Boy Williamson, Little Walter, Lead Belly, Big Bill Broonzy, B.B. King, and Robert Johnson. The blues isn't the music of a generation, it's the music of a lifetime. If you call yourself a music fan, you need to listen to the blues. Yet another genre that I've gotten into may be a shock to some of you: country music. I know I've made fun of country music in the past, but I was a really young and angry individual back then. Living up in Chicago for 2 years helped to remind me to be true to my roots. I remember that I grew up with a lot of country music as a kid, and I was able to rediscover my love for it. When the hustle and bustle of the big city made me feel homesick, I decided to listen to country music to remind me of home, and I'm so glad that I did. I know country music gets a bad rap due to how processed and generic it's become. Well, screw that radio-friendly crap. Real country music is raw and true blue. Country music is stereotyped as being the genre that people commit suicide to. But sad country songs aren't all country songs. Heck, they're not even the majority. There's plenty of country music out there that's fun, rowdy, and puts you in a good mood. Like the blues, country music's appeal comes from its simple nature. The artists who sing them don't sound like musicians, they sound like actual people. It makes sense as a lot of country artists grew up in the country themselves and relate to all what country folk go through. Country music is a genre that makes me appreciate all I have. From wide open spaces to home-cooked meals, I'm constantly telling myself, thank God I'm a country boy. Like the blues, a lot of country artists sound like they have similar styles, so it's hard to talk about them separately. So, here are a list of my favorite country musicians: Johnny Cash, the Everly Brothers, Randy Travis, Dwight Yoakam, Alabama, Alan Jackson, Garth Brooks, Shania Twain, Trace Adkins, and Blake Shelton. I always hear some people say, I don't like country music, and I ask, have you listened to Johnny Cash? They say no, and I say, do so, and you're welcome. Talk about transitioning from genres that are the complete opposite from each other. Now people, try to stay with me for this. I'm a white guy whose ancestors originate from England, Ireland, Germany, Holland, and Scotland. There is no sign of any other race in my DNA that I know of. I grew up in the country my whole life. Barely have any experience of living near civilization at all. I was raised a non-delinquent by the two God-fearing parents that I have. That being said, I love hip-hop music. A couple years ago when I was looking for music genres to get into, I stumbled upon hip-hop. Never in my life did this kind of music look like it would appeal to me. This was music of the city, and I was a redneck who was so pale that you couldn't find me in a white room. Keeping that in mind, I tried out hip-hop music, and I'm so glad I did. Hip-hop has been stereotyped as being music that's about butts, drugs, and drive-bys. No, once again, that's just the crap they play on the radio. Seriously, you people need to try to find other ways to listen to your music. Trust me, the radio isn't going to make you a music expert. Anyway, what seemed like music that sounded like the ramblings of angry youth on the surface is poetry set to beats. Its hardest critics would say that you don't need to be intelligent to make hip-hop music. I beg to differ. Hip-hop artists have proven that they are well-read and have really extensive vocabularies. Not to mention, hip-hop has some of the most complex music production I've ever heard. Putting samples together to rap over is not an easy task, so those who do it well do it really well, and you can tell when somebody doesn't know what they're doing. All hip-hop artists have their own distinct style when it comes to making their music, helping to set them apart from other artists. Busta Rhymes' verses all have the same rhyme to them, even if he has to make up his own words for that to be possible. Eminem likes to bring his dark sense of humor into his lyrics, on top of just being a wisecracker who blasts everybody he can get his hands on. The Beastie Boys like to combine their rap style with rock music. I can go on and on. It was easy for me to get into hip-hop music because since a lot of Golden Age hip-hop artists sampled rock songs that I love, I was able to ease my way into their music with an open mind. It was something familiar, yet something new at the same time. I soon branched off and got into more hardcore hip-hop, which was shocking and raw compared to what I was used to, but still something that I managed to soak my feet with and warm up to. Hip-hop music is a genre that I never expected to like, but ended up loving it and exposed me to a world I wasn't aware of. A world of the angry urban youth who are fed up with society and express their frustrations through music. My favorite hip-hop artists include Run DMC, Beastie Boys, Public Enemy, Eric B. and Rakim, A Tribe Called Quest, NWA, Kool Moe Dee, LL Cool J, De La Soul, Wu-Tang Clan, Redman, Cypress Hill, Busta Rhymes, Fugees, Outkast, Eminem, and Missy Elliott. For the next artist to talk about, I remember I was watching Ralph Bakshi's American Pop. There's a scene where Tony plays a song for a bunch of record producers. The song he plays is Night Moves, and that's when I remembered, oh yeah, I really love Bob Seger. Bob Seger is one of the few musicians who gives me goosebumps whenever I listen to him. Both my parents are big fans of him, so I grew up hearing a lot of his music. You talk about a guy who's good to listen to when you're on a road trip, Bob Seger is that guy. His music style is very similar to the rock and roll originators from the 50s, but he is also known for his softer and more folky sounding ballads. Take your pick, you really can't go wrong with this guy. I'd have to say Night Moves is my favorite song by him. It's one of the few songs that I always listen to a second time whenever I finish it. It's that good. It's the kind of song where if it's a Saturday night and you've got nothing else to do, you can sit outside looking up at the sky, playing the song in the background. You'll soon find yourself singing along with it and just being happy to be alive. Bob Seger may not be the most creative musician to come out of the classic rock era, but not every musician has to be groundbreaking and innovative. Sometimes some musicians just need to love making music and be good at it. They shouldn't try to be the next big thing, they'll only be setting themselves up for disaster. I believe popularity happens by accident, so just do what you love doing and you'll never know where it might get you. That's the appeal of Bob Seger. Listen to Night Moves. Do it. Going back to my childhood for this one, I grew up in the 2000s. I was going through my awkward teenage years, feeling lonely, depressed, and angsty. The popular music at the time really wasn't cutting it for me. It was too upbeat and too happy. Screw this poppy crap, I want music that speaks to me. And then my next door neighbor and best friend at the time introduced me to Blink-182. Now this music was more like it. This power trio made songs that I could relate to at the time. Whether it was being lonely or not getting along with my parents, there was always a Blink-182 song to comfort how I was feeling. It was a unique brand of music that combined the rebellious and angsty lyrics of punk rock with the catchy hooks and chorus structure of pop music. You'd think that would never work, but it did. It was the best of both worlds. It was pop music with an edge. I rediscovered Blink-182 a couple years ago, and I instantly got a nostalgia trip. While some of the pop boy bands that I liked as a kid got worse as I got older, Blink-182 actually stayed relevant, and dare I say, great. I know pop punk gets a bad rep, as I know some people who call pop punk rockstars as wannabe punks, but you know what? Who cares? So they're not as hardcore as the punk rock of the late 70s and early 80s. Does that mean they suck? Of course not. Good music is good music. Who cares what genre it's in? Except if it's dubstep. Point is, Blink-182 is great music. It's music for the young, and for the young at heart. We now come to the featured presentation of this video on my favorite music. My best friend Dale made me a list of his favorite albums that he showed to me. Most of the entries was music I recognized, but one stood out to me. The Velvet Underground and Nico. Never heard of it. I did research and found out about it. Turns out it's one of the most influential rock albums ever made. However, I was already wanting to listen to it as it was made in the 60s, and the 60s is my favorite decade for music. I'll gladly listen to anything from the 60s. So I ordered the CD off of Amazon, and when it arrived, I stuck it in my car's CD player and listened to it on my way to work that day. I said, "Alright, most influential rock album of all time, show me what you got." Seems cliched, but that album changed me. It was unlike anything I ever heard at the time. It sounded like more than just music to me. It sounded like a masterpiece. It combined everything I love about music all into one album. I found out the man behind all this musical mastery was named Lou Reed. Tragedy struck in October 2013 when Lou Reed died suddenly. This was a few months after I had gotten into Velvet Underground, and I just got the rest of their albums for my birthday. I found out Lou Reed had an extensive solo career as a musician after the Velvet Underground broke up. In tribute to him, I decided to collect all of Lou Reed's albums. Eventually, I did. It's sad to say Lou Reed's solo career doesn't quite get the recognition it deserves. Lou Reed has a special gift to music. No two Lou Reed albums sound the same. He was always experimenting and finding new ways to keep his music fresh, but familiar at the same time. What I love most about Lou Reed is he's a true blue rock and roller. He was a musician first and foremost. He was never worried about how he looked or what people thought of him. He just wanted to make music, and that he did. He even had a good enough sense of humor that he wasn't afraid to completely troll people. He released an album called Metal Machine Music, which consists of an hour of droning feedback noise. He did this because he joked about the fact that he could make anything and his record label would release it, and he proved himself right. That is hilarious. While the album is not a pleasant listen by any means, it exists as an example of just the kind of guy Lou was. Another quality of Lou that sets him apart is his lyrics. Lou Reed might have been a musician, but he could have found success as a poet as well. His lyrics are well written and powerful, having several songs in his catalog that I can dedicate to friends when they're feeling down. I love the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed so much that the Velvet Underground has eclipsed the Beatles as my favorite band, and Lou Reed has become my favorite musician. It's the music that speaks to me as an artist and as a person, and I never get tired of it. Well, that'll wrap it up for this video about music. Who are your favorite bands, musicians, genres of music, and albums? Let me know in the comments below. Until next week, take it easy, fam.